For 15 years, I worked for the United States Central Intelligence Agency. I learned to interrogate terrorists, to identify lies in 7 different languages, to keep secrets that could bring down governments. But no training, no operations manual, no prior experience could have prepared me for what was about to happen. When I dialed the return code on the secure phone, a low, controlled male voice said simply, "Agent Reyes, Gate Sector 4B, 15 minutes, bring Omega level identification." "Come alone." Before I could ask any questions, the call was cut off. Omega level, those 2 words made my stomach churn. In the CIA's classification hierarchy, there are levels of secrecy ranging from confidential to top secret. But above all that, buried in protocols that few agents even know exist, is the Omega level. Omega operations don't appear in reports. They aren't discussed in meetings. They don't officially exist. They are the secrets that the American government keeps from its own intelligence agents. I had used this access only twice before, and both occasions involved situations that even today make me wake up sweating in the middle of the night. I quickly donned my dark suit, tied my hair in a tight bun, grabbed my special credentials, and headed out into the humid Washington, D.C. night. The streets were deserted, only a few yellow streetlights illuminating the wet asphalt. As I drove down I-395, my mind raced, trying to imagine what could warrant an emergency. Call out in the middle of the night with Omega-level secrecy. Imminent terrorist attack? Double agent discovered? Stolen biological weapon? Nothing I could imagine seemed to justify that level of urgency and secrecy. When I arrived at Sector 4B, 2 men were waiting for me at the gate. They were dressed in civilian clothes, but their military bearing was unmistakable. They didn't smile. They didn't greet me. They simply extended their hands to check my credentials, scanned my fingerprint, made me sign 3 different documents, and demanded that I completely empty my pockets. My cell phone, my watch, even my pen were confiscated. One of them ran a metal detector over my body with almost surgical precision. The gate opened with that heavy electronic sound I never liked to hear, the sound of being pulled into something from which there is no return. I was led through underground corridors I had never seen before, despite working at that complex for over a decade. The walls were reinforced concrete, windowless, with steel doors every 20 meters, equipped with biometric readers. We passed through 4 different security levels, each requiring new identity checks. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the echo of our footsteps and the distant hum of ventilation systems. I tried to keep my breathing under control, but my heart was beating faster and faster. Something was deeply wrong. Do you believe the government is actually hiding evidence about Bigfoot? Comment below what you think, and if you've ever had a strange experience in the forest, share it with us. Finally, we reached a door unlike any other. This one had no number, no identifying plate, just a symbol I'd never seen before. A triangle inside a circle, with 3 lines running through the center. One of the guards placed his hand on the biometric scanner and spoke loudly. "Omega confirmation, Spectra Sector, access authorized by Deputy Director Morrison." The door swung open with a pneumatic sound, revealing an even narrower corridor, descending at a steep incline. As we descended, I realized we were going much deeper than any official facility I knew. This wasn't just a basement. It was a facility within a facility, a secret buried beneath layers of other secrets. The final door opened into a small aseptic anteroom, lit by fluorescent lights that made everything seem artificial and disturbingly clinical. 3 people awaited me, an army colonel I didn't recognize wearing a uniform, without identifiable insignia, a woman in a white lab coat with deep dark circles under her eyes and an expression that suggested she hadn't slept in days, and a man in a gray suit who had that look I'd learned to recognize immediately. high-ranking CIA officer, probably Operations Directorate. No one smiled. No one offered a handshake. The man in the suit simply pointed to a chair and said, "Sit down, Agent Reyes. What you are about to see cannot, under any circumstances, be discussed outside." "This facility, do you understand?" I nodded, maintaining my neutral expression despite the turmoil of anxiety growing in my chest. The man continued, his voice monotonous as if he were reading a financial report and not revealing something that was clearly of critical importance. 3 days ago, a military reconnaissance team conducting survival exercises in the Cascade Mountains in Washington state encountered something unexpected. Initially, we believed it to be an injured bear. The soldiers, following humanitarian protocol, attempted to provide assistance. That's when they realized it wasn't a bear. It wasn't any animal catalogued by modern science. He paused, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that frightened me more than any direct threat could: genuine fear. "What did you capture?" I asked, feeling my voice sound strange, even to my own ears. The woman in the white lab coat stepped forward, clutching a folder to her chest as if it were a shield. "We captured a specimen that matches all the folkloric descriptions of what we popularly call Sasquatch, Yeti, or more commonly, Bigfoot. It's alive, intelligent beyond any expectation, and extremely hostile to any form of containment." I should have laughed. Under any other circumstances, I would have thought I was being subjected to some kind of bizarre psychological test, a CIA reaction assessment. But the atmosphere, the level of security, the expressions of the people in the room, everything indicated that this was real. The colonel activated a monitor on the wall, and images from security cameras began to play. I saw soldiers moving cautiously through the forest, flashlight in hand, when suddenly something enormous moved among the trees. The camera shook. There were muffled screams, and then the image clearly showed. For only 3 seconds, but it was enough. A bipedal creature with dark fur, over 2.5 meters tall, carrying something in its arms. It wasn't a clumsy bear. It wasn't a man in a costume. It was something that moved with surprising grace, despite its massive size, something clearly intelligent by the way it assessed the terrain before each step. "My God!" I whispered, and that was all I could manage to say. "We managed to track and capture the specimen using high-powered tranquilizer darts," the colonel continued, his voice tense. "It took 20 darts. Any known animal would have overdosed on 4. We transported the creature to this facility 18 hours ago. Since waking up, it has demonstrated behavior that goes beyond simple animal intelligence. He seems to understand basic elements of human language. It responds to commands. It demonstrates complex emotion, and even more disturbing, it seems to be trying to communicate with us." The room fell silent. My scientific mind struggled to process this information while my intuition screamed that none of this should be possible. "Why me?" I finally asked. "I'm a field agent, specializing in human interrogation. I'm not a primatologist. I'm not a xenobiologist. Why was I summoned?" The man in the suit stepped forward. "Because, Agent Reyes, you have the highest success rate in interrogating hostile and uncooperative individuals in the entire agency. You can extract information from people who have sworn to die before they talk. And because, frankly, nobody knows how to proceed here. We don't have a manual for this. There's no precedent. You'll improvise, as you always do. But this time, we're not dealing with a human being. We're dealing with something that challenges our understanding of evolution, of biology, of everything we thought we knew about life on Earth." I took a deep breath, processing the magnitude of what was being asked. "When do I start?" The colonel glanced at his watch. "Now, he's in the observation room. We only have a few hours before higher authorities decide what to do with him. And Agent Reyes, he gripped my arm with unexpected force. Be very careful. He may seem restrained, but he already accidentally killed one of our technicians who got too close. We don't know for sure what he's capable of. With those words of warning still echoing in my mind, I was led into the next room. And it was there, through reinforced glass, that I saw for the first time a real, live Bigfoot, chained to a reinforced metal chair, its dark, deeply intelligent eyes staring at me with a mixture of hatred, fear, and something that shocked me even more: recognition. The interrogation room was unlike any I had ever worked in. The walls were reinforced concrete with no one-way mirror, just high-definition cameras installed in the upper corners, recording every possible angle. The temperature was a few degrees below comfortable, a standard tactic to keep prisoners uncomfortable and more likely to cooperate. But looking at that creature, I doubted that cold made much difference to a being clearly adapted to surviving the brutal winters of the Pacific Northwest Mountains. He sat in an industrial metal chair, originally designed to restrain highly dangerous prisoners. Thick chains, of a type I knew to be rated to withstand several tons of tension, bound his wrists, ankles, and torso. Even so, seated and restrained, he was impressive. His seated height suggested that standing, he would easily exceed 3 meters. His body was covered in a dense coat of fur, a dark copper color mixed with deep brown tones, more like human hair than animal fur. The muscles beneath that covering were visible and powerful, each movement, even the slightest, revealing a strength I could barely comprehend. But it was the eyes that paralyzed me. I had interrogated terrorists, assassins, spies, people capable of the most terrible atrocities, and I always managed to maintain that necessary professional distance. But when I looked into that creature's eyes, I saw something that completely disarmed me: ancient intelligence, profound sadness, and a knowledge that seemed to span millennia. They weren't the eyes of an animal. They were the eyes of someone who had seen empires rise and fall, who had witnessed the transformation of the world, who carried memories of a time before humanity dominated every corner of the planet. "Caution when entering," the colonel's voice came through the intercom. "Maintain at least 3 meters of distance. At the first sign of aggression, we will immediately exit and use additional restraint." I nodded. Feeling my heart pound against my ribs, I placed my hand on the door-opening mechanism, and for a brief second, I wanted to retreat. But it wasn't an option. I took 3 deep breaths, as I had learned in stress management training, and entered the room. The sound of the door closing behind me was like a final verdict. Now it was just him and me. The creature didn't move when I entered, but its eyes followed me with laser-like attention. I walked slowly to the chair, positioned about 4 meters away from it, and sat down, maintaining my open and non-threatening posture, hands visible on the table, expression neutral, but not hostile. For long minutes, we just stared at each other. I had learned that silence can be a powerful tool in interrogations. People feel compelled to fill the void. But it wasn't a person, right? Or was it? "My name is Helena," I finally began, keeping my voice calm and even. "Helena Reyes, I'm not here to hurt you." No visible reaction, but something in her eyes subtly changed. I continued, "I know you're scared. I know you didn't ask to be here, but I need you to understand that there are people in this facility who want to understand you, and there are others who—" I paused, choosing my words carefully, "who see you as a threat to be eliminated." This caught her attention. Her head tilted slightly to the side, a surprisingly human gesture of curiosity or interest. "Before we begin this insane story, leave a like if you enjoy government conspiracy." stories, and subscribe to the channel with the bell activated, because this story will keep you up at night. Then, to my complete surprise and the shock of everyone watching through the cameras, he spoke. The voice was deep, guttural, with a resonant quality that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. The words were disjointed, the pronunciation strange, but undeniably recognizable. Hell, Ina, you speak, I listen. Behind the observation glass, I could imagine the explosion of activity, but inside the room, I kept my expression carefully controlled, even though every nerve in my body was screaming with the impossibility of what had just happened. Yes, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. You listen. You understand. He nodded slowly, a decidedly human gesture. Then, with visible effort, like someone struggling to remember words from a nearly forgotten language, he said, Taharen, I listen. Many winters. Observe humans. Many, many humans. My God. He had a name. He observed humans. For how long? Taharen, I repeated, and seeing something like gratitude pass through those ancient eyes made me feel a wave of emotion I hadn't expected. How long have you observed humans? He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, there was a sadness so deep it cut like a blade. Since great noise, iron flies, human kills human, before, long before. It took me a moment to process. Are you talking about war? War with airplanes? World War II? He didn't confirm it verbally, but something in his expression said yes. This being was at least 80 years old, possibly much older, and had been observing humanity during some of our most violent conflicts. What had he seen? What did he think of us? The questions exploded in my mind, but I knew I needed to take it slow, build trust, or that unique opportunity for communication could close forever. In the following minutes, we established a rudimentary but functional form of communication. Taharen had a limited vocabulary in English, learned through decades of listening to human conversations from a distance, but his comprehension far exceeded his ability to speak. He could understand complete sentences, respond with gestures when words failed him, and occasionally surprised us with statements that revealed a sophisticated intelligence working behind that broken language. Taharen, I asked carefully, are you the only one? Are there others like you? The question was crucial. If he was unique, he was possibly the most valuable living being on the planet from a scientific standpoint. But if there were more, well, that would change everything we knew about North American biology. He was silent for a long moment, and I could see an internal conflict happening behind those eyes. Finally, he said, many. Not as many as in the old days, but many. I took a deep breath. An entire population, hidden throughout recorded human history. Where do you live? I asked, knowing this. Information could lead to expeditions, hunts, things I'd rather not imagine. Taharen shook his head slowly. Don't tell me. You can't tell me. You humans always hunt, always kill what they don't understand. His words were simple, but the accusation was devastating. I wanted to argue, wanted to defend my kind, but images from the security cameras flashed in my mind. Armed soldiers, tranquilizer darts, this interrogation room. He wasn't wrong. We're not all like that, I offered weakly. Some of us just want to understand, want to protect. He looked at me with an expression I can only describe as pity. Helena speaks the truth. Helena, good. But Helena won. Many others, not good. Many others want to use, want to control, want a weapon. That last word froze me. A weapon! Has anyone ever tried to use their people as a weapon? The silence that followed was answer enough. And then Taharen began to tell a story that would change everything I thought I knew about the secret. Operations of the American government. Many winters ago, maybe 20, maybe 30, uniformed men came, not like you, not like noisy soldiers, silent, wearing things that make you sleep without seeing, without smelling. Invisible tranquilizer darts, probably fired with advanced targeting systems. This described specialized military operations, the kind of things special forces or CIA paramilitary groups would use. They took 3 of ours, young, strong, took them to a place like this. Cold, metal, light that hurts the eyes. My stomach churned. What happened to them? Taharen looked directly at the cameras, and I knew he was being watched. Men taught them things, where to go, how to listen, how to catch humans without hurting them too much. Use them to catch other humans, in the forest, in the mountains, places where normal men can't go silently. My God, they had trained Sasquatch for capture operations? The idea was so absurd and yet so logically useful that it couldn't be dismissed as fantasy. Those 3 who were taken, did they come back? The answer came laden with pain. 1 came back, confused, scared. He didn't speak our language well anymore. There was something here. He pointed to the back of his own head. That was beeping. We took it out. Then he died. Quickly. A disease we didn't know about. An implanted tracking device, probably with some kind of failsafe that released a biological agent when it was removed. A brutal technique, but effective, and completely consistent with black programs I knew existed on the darkest fringes of intelligence operations. The other 2 never came back? Taharen shook his head heavily. No, but I saw them years later. Walking with uniformed men, doing what men commanded. Eyes, empty. They were no longer people. They were tools. The word tool echoed in the room. I felt nausea growing. If this were true, and every trained instinct I had told me it was, it meant that somewhere buried in classification levels I had never accessed, there was a program that used Sasquatch in military or intelligence operations. What else had they done? How many other creatures or people had been used like that? Taharen, he said slowly, I promise you I will find out the truth about this, and I will do everything in my power to prevent it from happening again. He looked at me for a long moment, assessing me, and then said something that haunts me to this day. Helena, a good person, but Helena, a small fish in a big ocean. Helena can't stop what started long ago. His words were prophetic in ways I would only understand later, when everything crumbled and I found myself running for my life, carrying secrets that powerful men would kill to protect. After that devastating revelation about the alleged Sasquatch program for special operations, I needed to change tactics. Taharen was shutting down emotionally. His shoulders slumped, his gaze distant. I had seen this reaction before in interrogations. The moment when the person being interrogated realizes they've revealed too much and retreats in psychological self-protection. But unlike terrorists or criminals I had interrogated, Taharen wasn't protecting himself from legal punishment. He was protecting himself from the extinction of his people. Can we talk about other things? I offered gently. It doesn't have to be about military operations or where your people live. I just would like to better understand who you are. He looked at me with those old eyes, assessing whether he could trust me. Finally, an almost imperceptible nod. Yes, ask. I breathed a sigh of relief. Your people, do you have families? Children? A shadow of what might have been a smile crossed his face. Yes, cubs, my 3 cubs, 2 males, 1 female, grown now. The humanity in that response hit me like a punch. He had children. He was a father. Somewhere in the vastness of the Cascade Mountains, There was a family that didn't know if he was alive or dead. They must be worried about you, he said, and it wasn't a question. Tahren closed his eyes. Yes, companion. She is wise. She said, don't go too far. But I saw strange lights. I heard noises that aren't from the forest. I wanted to see. I wanted to protect our land. So that was it. He was on a reconnaissance mission, assessing some human activity near his people's territory when he was captured. You speak of mate and offspring in such a human way, I observed carefully. Do your people form lasting families? Do they stay together? Tahren opened his eyes, and there was intensity there. We are not animals, Helena. Were the first people. Before your kind walked these lands, we were already here. We had a word for it. He struggled, searching for the English term. Large places where many live together, with fire, with stored food, with stories passed down from old to young. Civilization. He was describing civilization. You had cities, I asked, hardly able to believe what I was hearing. He shook his head. Not like humans do now, not tall stone and metal, but yes, permanent places, worked caves, trees shaped to make shelter, places where 10, 20, sometimes 50 families lived together, shared game, made tools, trained their young. I was mentally transcribing every word, knowing this was possibly the greatest anthropological discovery in human history. What happened? Why? Don't you have these communities anymore? The pain that crossed his face was visceral. Humans arrived. Not humans like now, all with clothes and machines, ancient humans with animal skins and stone spears, but many, always more and more. Where humans arrived, game disappeared, trees were cut down, water became polluted, we retreated, then came humans with iron, then humans with weapons that make noise and fire. Each time we retreated further. He was describing thousands of years of interspecies competition, territorial displacement, and cultural extinction. But you survived, I pointed out. Even with all this pressure, you're still here. He looked at me with an expression that mixed pride and despair. Yes, we survived by learning to be ghosts, by ceasing to be a people with villages and fire and gatherings of many, by breaking into small families, hidden, always moving, always afraid. That's not living, Helena. That's just not dying yet. The distinction cut me deep. They had survived by sacrificing everything that made them a civilization, reducing themselves to isolated families, wandering the last unexplored wilderness areas. How many of you are there today? Approximately. That was the question everyone at the agency wanted answered. Tahren remained silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, heavy with sorrow. When I was young, my grandfather used to say we could call 200 families together in a big reunion. That was many winters ago. Now, if every family I know came, maybe 40, maybe less. Many didn't answer the last call. We don't know if they're hiding better or if they've left the world. That's the story the CIA doesn't want you to know. But I'm going to tell you everything in the next few minutes. Comment, I want to know, if you're ready for the truth. Fewer than 200 individuals, if each family had 4 or 5 members. A critically endangered population, an intelligent species on the brink of extinction, and the world didn't even know they existed. Tahren, if people knew you existed, that you were intelligent, that you had families and culture, some people would want to help. They would want to protect you. He gave me that look of pity again. Helena, when humans find something rare and precious, they don't protect it. They collect it. They study it. They put it in cages and call it protection. We know. We've seen it happen with wolves, with big mountain bears, with so many others. Better to be a myth that is never proven than to be a rare species in a conservation cage. The devastating wisdom of that statement left me speechless. He was absolutely right. Humanity's first instinct upon discovering a new species of intelligent great ape would not be to leave them alone. It would be capture for study, confinement in monitored reserves, captive breeding programs. It would be the end of the freedom they had managed to maintain for so long. Then, "Why are you telling me all this?" I finally asked. "Why not just remain silent?" Ren sighed, a deeply human sound. "Because I'm going to die here, Helena. I know, I'm old, I'm wounded. And men out there," he gestured vaguely toward the cameras, "they'll study me dead or alive. Before that happens, I want at least one human to know the truth. To know that we are not monsters from stories to scare children. We are people, ancient people, who only want to live in peace in the last remaining shadows of the world." And at that moment, looking at that noble and condemned being, I decided something that would change my life forever. I wouldn't let him die there. After 3 hours of speaking with Ren, I was instructed to leave the interrogation room for a debriefing. My mind was in turmoil, processing not only the information he had shared, but the moral, ethical, and practical implications of everything I had learned. When I entered the observation room, I found 7 people, instead of the original 3. Apparently, our conversation had attracted the attention of higher-ranking officials. A man I didn't recognize, wearing an impeccably expensive suit and a barely disguised expression of hunger, immediately approached. "Agent Reyes, extraordinary work. You've obtained more usable information in 3 hours than 2 days of observation yielded. Particularly interesting is that mention of a previous operational utilization program. We'll need you to elaborate on that aspect in the next interrogation." Something about the way he said operational utilization made my stomach churn. "Sir," I replied carefully, "with all due respect, I don't believe further interrogations are the right approach at this time. The individual is traumatized, physically compromised, and if we become too aggressive, we could completely lose the line of communication we've established." The man smiled, but it was the kind of smile I've seen on members of oversight committees when they're about to completely disregard their recommendations. "Your concern is noted, Agent, but we have a limited operational window. Decisions are being made at levels above ours about what to do with this asset." "Active?" I repeated, feeling anger boiling in my chest. "With all due respect, sir, this is not a weapon or a piece of equipment. It is an intelligent being, possibly sentient, with a family and—" The colonel, who had been in the original room, interrupted. "Agent Reyes, we understand your position, but we need to be practical. This specimen represents an unprecedented scientific and potentially strategic opportunity. We cannot allow emotional considerations to cloud our judgment." I looked around the room, searching for an ally, and met the eyes of the woman in the white lab coat, the scientist. She looked at me with an expression that mixed agreement and helplessness. "When you say decisions are being made, what exactly does that mean?" I pressed. The man in the expensive suit exchanged a glance with the colonel before replying, "It means that representatives from multiple agencies, defense, intelligence, some private entities with national security contracts, are discussing the best course of action. Options include prolonged scientific study, attempting to locate and document additional population, or other applications." That other applications hung in the air like lead. They were considering resurrecting the program Ren had mentioned. "And what happens to Ren while these decisions are being made?" I asked, deliberately using his name instead of treating him like an object. The scientist finally spoke, her voice weary. He's in stable but not optimal condition. The capture involved significant trauma. He has a partial fracture of his left rib, a laceration on his shoulder that is beginning to become infected despite antibiotics, and signs of chronic malnutrition. If we don't get more aggressive medical care soon, the infection could become septic. In other words, they were letting him suffer while they decided whether it was worth keeping him alive. "I need authorization to arrange proper medical treatment," he said firmly. "If you want to continue extracting information from him, he needs to be able to communicate, and that requires that he not be dying of sepsis." The man in the suit nodded vaguely. "Do whatever is necessary to keep him viable. But Agent Reyes," he leaned closer, lowering his voice though. Everyone in the room could hear. "Don't confuse operational necessity with compassion. This is not a human being. He has no rights under our law. He is, at best, uncatalogued wildlife in American territory. We treat this as a strategic asset, nothing more." Something inside me broke at that moment. All the justifications I had used over the years to explain the morally questionable things the CIA did, national security, the greater good, difficult decisions in a dangerous world, suddenly seemed hollow. Looking at Tahren through the glass, seeing him sit alone in his chair, chained, wounded, far from his family, I knew I couldn't be a part of it. But I also knew that if I openly opposed it, I would be removed from the operation immediately. So I did what trained agents do. I lied. "I understand, sir. I'll focus on extracting tactical information about population location, movement patterns, and any knowledge he has about the previous program. I'll give you everything I can." The man smiled contentedly. "Excellent. Your next interrogation period is scheduled for 0600 hours. You have 6 hours to rest. I suggest you use that time wisely." I nodded, accepted the debriefing documents I needed to sign, and left the observation room. But instead of going to the designated temporary quarters, I went in a different direction, to the archives. If Tahren was right about a previous program using Sasquatch in operations, there had to be documentation somewhere. And if I was going to implicate my career, possibly my freedom, and even my life in what I was planning to do, I needed solid evidence of what was happening. I needed ammunition. Using my Omega credentials, I accessed the classified database terminals. It took 40 minutes of creative searches using oblique keywords before I found it. They weren't official documents. They were cross-references, margin notes, budgets buried under dozens of subcategories. But they were there. Project Spectre Shadow, Operation Dark, Forest, Silent Giant Initiative, all programs that existed between 1973 and 1986, all with substantial budgets, all with results classified above the level even my access could reach. But the brief descriptions available were revealing. Use of atypical fauna for infiltration into prohibited terrain. Development of non-human control techniques for asset recovery. Training of unconventional biological specimens for silent operations. Tahren wasn't delirious. It had happened. It was probably still happening under different names. With trembling fingers, I copied everything I could to a fingernail-sized encrypted drive I kept hidden for emergencies. Then I erased my access fingerprints and returned to the surface. It was 4:30 in the morning. I had 90 minutes before the next interrogation, and at that moment, looking at the sky beginning to lighten over Washington, D.C., I decided I was going to get Tahren out of that facility. I didn't know how. I didn't know if it was possible. But I knew I had to try, because if I didn't, if I let the CIA turn him and potentially his entire people into operational assets, I would never be able to look at myself in the mirror again. Agent Helena Reyes was about to become a traitor, and strangely, I felt more whole than I had felt in years. At 5:47 a.m., I descended back into the facility's basement. My plan, if I could call it a plan, was rudimentary at best and suicidal at worst. But there was a window of opportunity. During the breaks between security shifts, there was always a brief period of approximately 8 minutes where only 2 guards covered the entire sector instead of the usual 4. If I could exploit that moment, using my access credentials to create confusion in the security systems perhaps, just perhaps, I could reach Ta-Ren. But before any escape attempt, I needed to be sure he would survive outside the facility. His injury was serious, and 8 hours without proper treatment since I had pressed for medical care meant the infection could be significantly worse. When I entered the observation room, I immediately noticed the tension in the air. The scientist, Dr. Sarah Carter, according to her identification, was arguing heatedly with 2 military technicians. "He has a fever of 40 degrees, she said, her voice tense with professional frustration. The clear protocol would be to start broad-spectrum intravenous antibiotics immediately. Every hour we wait increases the risk of systemic sepsis. One of the technicians, a sergeant with an expression of bureaucratic boredom, replied, "Doctor, we have explicit orders not to administer anything without the approval of the operations officer, and he's not available until 800. Dr. Carter slammed her folder on the table. "So at 800 you'll have a cadaver to study instead of a live specimen. Is that what you want?" I joined the conversation. "Dr. Carter, I have Omega clearance for this operation. Doesn't that give me the power to override medical protocols?" She turned to me as if I were a lifeline. "Technically, yes, if you assume full responsibility for the procedures. But..." She hesitated, looking at the technicians who clearly didn't want to be involved in breaking protocol. "You would have to administer the medications yourself, and you would have to go into the containment room with him." It was exactly the opportunity I needed. "I have no problem taking that risk," I declared, with a confidence I was far from feeling. I established rapport with the individual during the initial interrogation. He trusts me within reasonable limits. If Dr. Carter instructs me on dosages and administration, I can do it. The technicians exchanged relieved glances. No one wanted to enter that room. "He will have to remain restrained," the sergeant insisted. "Safety regulations are absolute." I agreed, already planning exactly how I would break those restraints within a few hours. Dr. Carter led me to an adjacent medical room and began preparing a series of medications. "I'm going to give you a combination of ceftriaxone for bacterial infection, high-dose ibuprofen for fever and inflammation, and a saline solution for hydration. Ideally, he would need IV fluids, but I doubt I'll be able to establish an IV line in him without deep sedation." She showed me how to administer intramuscular injections, where to inject, how much pressure to apply. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked. "You don't agree?" "With what's happening here," I observed quietly, so only she could hear. She froze for a second, then continued preparing the medication. "It doesn't matter what I agree with or not. I'm not the one making these decisions." I placed my hand on hers. What if there was a way to ensure he wasn't used as a weapon or dissected in some black lab? She looked me directly in the eyes for the first time, and I saw there the same conflict I was feeling. "Agent Reyes, be very careful about what you're suggesting. I have a family, I have a career, I have a lot to lose." "We all have something to lose," I replied, "but he has everything to lose, his life, his freedom, his entire people, if they decide to use him to track the others." A heavy silence hung between us. Finally, Dr. Carter began preparing extra doses of each medication. "These are for long-term treatment. Administer every 12 hours for 5 days. If he were hypothetically outside of supervised medical care, he would need these doses to fight off the infection completely." She placed everything in a compact medical bag and handed it to me. Our eyes met again. and a silent understanding passed between us. "Thank you, Doctor," I said formally. "I'll administer the first treatment immediately." She nodded. "Be careful, Agent, and good luck with whatever you plan to do." It was the closest thing to confirmation of complicity I would receive. I grabbed the medical bag and headed for the containment room. My heart was pounding so hard, I feared the guards might hear. At 6:05 a.m., I entered the room where Taren remained chained. He was visibly worse than a few hours earlier. The skin beneath his fur was flushed and warm to the touch, his breathing shallow and rapid, his eyes glazed with fever. "Taren," I called softly, kneeling at a safe distance. "I brought medicine. It will help with the fever and the infection, but I need to touch you. I need to give you an injection. Do you understand?" He focused on me. With difficulty. "Helena, come back. You thought you won't come back." His voice was weak, his words more disjointed than before. The fever was affecting his cognition. "You would always come back," I replied, surprised by my own honesty. "You won't die here, I promise." I prepared the first injection, showing him what I was going to do. "This will hurt a little. I'm sorry." When the needle pierced the muscle in his arm, it stiffened but didn't react violently. I administered the 3 necessary injections, murmuring reassuring words as I worked. When I finished, I sat back down. "Taren, I need to ask you something important. Can you walk? If I removed these chains, would you be able to move?" He looked at me confused. "Why ask?" I took a deep breath, knowing I was about to cross a line of no return. "Because I'm going to get you out of here, today, and I'm going to need your help to make that happen." The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights. Then Taren said something that confirmed my decision was right. "Why, human, help me, risk everything?" And I replied with the only truth that mattered. "Because it's the right thing to do." The shift change was at 7:30 a.m. That gave me just over an hour to prepare Taren and position the necessary elements for the escape. The problem was that I couldn't simply release him and walk out. The facility had multiple layers of security, biometric scanners, surveillance cameras, doors, sealed with rotating codes, and no fewer than 18 employees between us and the nearest exit. I needed a distraction, a big distraction. After administering the medication, I informed the guards that I needed additional time with the prisoner to delve deeper into issues raised during the previous interrogation. They grumbled but didn't object. My Omega clearance meant I technically had complete autonomy over the operation. Once the door closed again and we were alone, I approached Taren and lowered my voice. "Listen carefully. I don't have time to explain everything. I'm going to disable the cameras in this room using an emergency maintenance code. I'll have approximately 4 minutes before anyone notices. In that time, I'll release you from your chains." "Then?" Taren asked, his eyes beginning to lighten slightly as the medication took effect. "Then, we'll cause a large enough emergency to evacuate this sector. There's a protocol for toxic gas leaks. Alarm sound. Emergency. Doors unlock automatically to allow evacuation. We'll use that." He nodded slowly, processing. "And when we're out, what?" It was an excellent question to which I didn't have a fully formed answer. "We'll improvise. But first, we need to get out of this complex." Using my access tablet, I navigated to the facility's maintenance system. Each Omega agent had backdoor access for emergencies, and I was about to grotesquely abuse that authority. I found the code to initiate a gas leak simulation in Delta Sector, adjacent to our current sector but not so close that this room would need immediate evacuation. With a tap, I activated the protocol. Immediately, alarms began to blare, echoing through the corridors. Red emergency lights pulsed, And exactly as predicted, I heard the sound of automatic doors unlocking in sequence. "Now," I murmured, rushing over to Ta-Ren. The shackles were of military design, but I knew, because I'd helped design the containment protocols years ago, that there was an emergency release in case a prisoner needed to be evacuated quickly. I entered the master code on the panel beside the chair. The shackles snapped open with a metallic click. Ta-Ren stood, staggering slightly, clearly still weak but functional. Standing, he was even more imposing than I'd imagined. At least 3 feet, 20 inches tall, shoulders as broad as a wardrobe. "We have to move, now." I opened the containment room door and peered down the corridor. The guards had left their positions, probably responding to the leak alarm. Perfect. "Follow me, and try to make as little noise as possible." Ta-Ren nodded, and we began to move down the corridor. He moved surprisingly quietly for something so large, each step calculated and deliberate. We reached the first checkpoint, a sealed door that normally required a biometric scan, but with the evacuation protocol active, it was unlocked. We passed through 3 corridors, climbed 2 emergency staircases, and for a glorious moment I thought we might actually make it. Then we heard voices coming toward us. "Here," I hissed, pulling Ta-Ren into a side storage room. We stood in the dark, his heavy breathing mingling with mine, while 2 people rushed past, discussing the gas leak. When the corridor fell silent again, we continued. It was when we reached Sector B that everything fell apart. A security technician, apparently not evacuated with the others, turned the corner and froze when he saw us. For a split second, we were all paralyzed. Then he yelled into the radio, Code Black, the specimen is loose in Sector B. Agent Reyes has him. Possible hostage situation." Shit. Code Black meant total lockdown of the facility. All doors that had been unlocked by the evacuation protocol would be sealed again in 30 seconds. "Run!" I yelled to Ta-Ren, and we started running. Behind us, the technician kept yelling into the radio, his hysterical voice echoing. Doors began to close in front of us, pneumatic mechanisms hissing. Ta-Ren, despite his size and injured condition, moved with surprising speed. He reached a descending door and simply held it, muscles tensing, preventing it from sealing completely. "Go!" he roared, and I slid underneath. He followed me seconds before the door finished closing, cutting a piece of his fur in the process. We were now in Sector A, just 1 division before the main exit. But we could hear boots rushing toward us, voices shouting orders. The facility was responding at full force. "Ta-Ren," I said quickly, "I know you're weak, but I need to ask, can you break down that door?" I pointed to the emergency exit, which, despite the initial evacuation protocol, was now sealed off by the lockdown. He examined the door, placed his enormous hands on the metal and pulled. The sound of twisting metal filled the corridor. The door didn't open completely, but he created an opening large enough for us to pass through. On the other side, we found not freedom, but the facility's internal parking lot, still within the security perimeter, but at least no longer in the claustrophobic underground corridors. Alarms kept blaring, red lights flashing. "Vehicle," Ta-Ren said, pointing to a transport van of the type used to move sensitive equipment. "Good idea," I agreed, rushing to it. The door was locked, but Ta-Ren simply broke the driver's side window and opened it from the inside. There were no keys, but I knew how to hotwire, a questionable skill learned during field operations training years ago. While I was working on the wires under the dashboard, I heard the worst possible thing. "Agent Reyes, exit the vehicle with your hands visible." It was Colonel Briggs, accompanied by a dozen armed guards, all with guns pointed at the van. My heart sank. We had come so close. "Colonel," I yelled through the broken window, "you don't understand what they plan to do to him. This isn't national security, it's slavery." The reply came cold and professional. You have 5 seconds to get out of the vehicle or we will open fire. Tahren placed his enormous hand on my shoulder. Helena, you tried. More than any human would. But I wasn't ready to give up. My fingers finally made the right connection and the van's engine roared to life. The van's engine roared, and without thinking too much because overthinking would paralyze me, I pressed the accelerator. The vehicle shot forward, tires screeching on the concrete of the parking lot. Shouts behind us, but more importantly the sound of gunfire. Bullets ricocheted off the van's reinforced chassis. Apparently, they had chosen a vehicle designed to transport sensitive materials, which meant light armor. A small victory in a completely insane situation. "Duck!" I yelled to Tahren as I maneuvered frantically toward the main gate. He squeezed himself as much as possible into the cargo space, which wasn't much considering his size. More shots rang out, and this time I heard the distinct sound of a bullet piercing metal and hitting something inside the vehicle. The van shuddered but kept running. Ahead, the main gate was closed, a reinforced steel barrier designed to stop vehicles much larger than this one. "You won't get through," Tahren warned, his voice surprisingly calm for someone being hit by gunfire. He was right. I wouldn't be able to break through that gate. But next to the main gate was a smaller structure, the security guard post, with its own access door. It was narrow, designed only for pedestrians, but the van was relatively compact. It was a tiny chance, but it was the only chance we had. I turned sharply, mounting the sidewalk and pointing directly at the side structure. "Grab onto something!" I yelled, and we collided. The impact was violent, throwing both Tahren and me against the vehicle's railings. Glass shattered, metal twisted, and for a terrifying moment I thought we were just trapped. But then the van pushed through the wreckage, the lighter structure of the guardhouse, giving way under our weight and momentum. We were on the other side. I sped down the access road, away from the facility. I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw lights, security vehicles initiating a chase. Of course, it wouldn't be that easy. "Tahren, are you hurt?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as I negotiated curves on the road at dangerous speed. "Small cut, nothing serious," he replied, though I could see blood darkening the fur on his arm. The impact had reopened the wound we were trying to treat. We reached the main highway, and I made a quick decision. Instead of heading towards the mountains where Tahren would be more comfortable, but where we would be more easily cornered, I drove towards the urban area. In the city, I could get lost in traffic, switch vehicles, use the complexity of the urban landscape as cover. At least, that's what I hoped. Behind us, 2 black SUVs kept a steady distance. They weren't trying to catch up. Yet they were coordinating, waiting for reinforcements, planning how to surround us. "Helena," Tahren said calmly, "they won't stop. You know that." I knew. I had just committed treason against the CIA, facilitated the escape of an Omega-level national security asset, and caused significant damage to a federal facility. If captured, I would face charges that would put me in prison for the rest of my life. "Then I won't let them capture me," I replied with a conviction I was far from feeling. We entered the city as the sky began to lighten with the dawn. It was about 7:45 in the morning, and the streets were beginning to fill with morning traffic. Perfect. I plunged into the flow of vehicles, making abrupt lane changes, turning onto side streets, using all the evasive maneuver training the CIA had given me. Ironically, the same techniques they taught me to escape adversary agents were now being used against my own agency. But I soon realized a problem. No matter how well I drove, a commercial van with a dented side and broken windows was extremely visible. We needed to change vehicles. I spotted a mall parking lot starting to fill up. Perfect. I quickly pulled in, found a space between 2 larger SUVs that would help hide our van, and turned off the engine. "Tahren, we need to get out of this vehicle and find another one. But there's a problem. I'm very big, very different, he finished, understanding immediately. I can't walk around in any human place without being seen. He was absolutely right. Even at a glance, even partially hidden, a 3-meter-tall Sasquatch would be impossible to conceal in an urban area. I need clothes, I murmured, thinking aloud. Something that covers you completely. And we need to do this fast. I looked around the parking lot and saw a clothing delivery van a few rows ahead. Sometimes luck is on our side. Stay here. Don't leave. No matter what you hear, I'll be back in 5 minutes. Before Taren could protest, I was already running through the parking lot. The delivery van was empty, the driver probably making deliveries inside the mall. The back door was locked, but then again, CIA training included basic lock-picking methods. In 30 seconds I was inside. Mountains of clothes in plastic bags. I started frantically searching, looking for anything extra large or XXL. I found winter coats in oversized sizes, sweatpants in extended sizes, and critically, an XXXL industrial work jumpsuit that might work. I stuffed everything into a large bag and was about to leave when I heard voices, parking lot security guards, discussing reports of a damaged van. Shit! I waited for them to pass, then ran back to our vehicle. Taren was exactly where I left her, her alert eyes following my return. Put this on, I said, tossing the clothes to him. It won't fit perfectly, but it'll cover you enough so it's not obviously you. He held the jumpsuit, examining it curiously. Humans wear fake skin, he observed. And there was a hint of humor in his voice, despite the terrible situation. While he put on the clothes, a complicated process given his size and injuries, I watched the parking lot. The black SUVs hadn't arrived yet, but it was only a matter of time. Ready, Taren finally said. The jumpsuit was stretched to its maximum. The coat was small but covered his upper body, and I had used a large scarf to wrap around his head and part of his face. From a distance, moving quickly, he could pass for an extremely large and ungainly man. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. Now let's go, I said, and try to walk. Less gracefully. Humans your size are generally more clumsy. It was surreal advice, but Taren understood and adjusted his gait. We crossed the parking lot, Taren limping deliberately to conceal his natural grace, me maintaining a normal pace but alert to any sign of pursuit. We reached the taxi area. Perfect. A yellow taxi was parked, the driver reading a newspaper. Waiting for passengers. We need to go to Alexandria, I said, opening the back door. The driver, a middle-aged man with a Middle Eastern accent, looked at Taren in surprise. Your friend is very big. Will he fit? He'll fit, I replied firmly, and Taren squeezed into the back seat, his knees virtually pressed against his chest, his head bowed so as not to touch the roof. The driver shook his head but started the meter. Where to in Alexandria? I gave a random address in a residential area. I had no real plan. I just needed to get out of that parking lot before the CIA arrived. The taxi started moving, and I allowed myself to breathe for the first time in 15 minutes. That's when my phone, which I foolishly hadn't discarded, started ringing. Blocked number. I answered but didn't say anything. Agent Reyes, came the voice of the man in the expensive suit from the facility. You made a catastrophic mistake. But we can still resolve this in a way that minimizes harm to everyone involved. His voice was soft, reasonable, the tone of someone negotiating the surrender of a barricaded criminal. Hand over the specimen to any police station or military installation. You'll receive a psychiatric evaluation, not criminal prosecution. We'll say it was a breakdown due to operational stress. It was an offer too good to be true, which meant that's exactly what it was, a lie. The moment I turned myself in, I'd disappear into some black hole of intelligence custody, and Tahren would be back on that interrogation table, or worse. No, I replied simply. Agent Reyes, be reasonable. Where do you think you can go? Every police department within a 200-kilometer radius has your picture. Every federal agency has been alerted. Do you have any money, somewhere to hide? Think logically. He was right, of course. I hadn't planned anything beyond immediate escape. I had no access to bank accounts. They would have already frozen them. I had no allies. Anyone I contacted would be monitored. I had no false identities prepared. I only had this taxi, the clothes I was wearing, and an injured Sasquatch wearing industrial overalls. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up. I immediately removed the phone battery and threw both out the window. The driver looked at me suspiciously in the rearview mirror. Problem with an ex-boyfriend, I offered as an explanation. Stalker, you understand. He mumbled sympathetically, I understand, yes. Women have a lot of problems with crazy men these days. I wished it were as simple as a stalker. After 20 minutes of driving, I asked him to stop at a gas station. I paid in cash. I had about $200 in my wallet, enough for a few hours but not much more, and dismissed the taxi. Tahren and I went into the public restroom, locking the door. We need to treat your arm again, I said, removing my jacket and examining the wound. It had bled during the crash and the race and needed another dose of antibiotics. Luckily, I had kept Dr. Carter's medical bag. I administered another injection, cleaned the wound with soap and water from the bathroom, and bandaged it using gauze I quickly bought at the gas station convenience store. How are you feeling? I asked. Tired, confused, but he paused, searching for words. Grateful. Helena risks everything. Why? It was a fair question. Why, really? Because, I replied slowly, organizing my thoughts as I spoke. I spent 15 years doing questionable things in the name of national security. I manipulated people, extracted secrets, sometimes used methods that kept me awake at night. I always convinced myself it was for the greater good. But this, I gestured to him, to our situation. This wasn't the greater good, it was just wrong. And I decided I needed to do something right, even if it costs me everything. Tahren gently placed his enormous hand on my shoulder. Helena is, how to say, honorable. An ancient word of my people, Yakrin. It means a person who chooses the difficult path when the easy path is wrong. Yakrin. I had just learned that Sasquatch had a specific word for moral integrity. How deep was their culture that we had ignored for so long? Thank you, I said simply, but now we need to figure out what to do. We can't stay in the city. We need to take you back to the mountains, to your territory. Very far. 500, maybe more, miles, he estimated. Washington State was on the other side of the country from where we were. It would be impossible to get there without resources, without a reliable vehicle, with the entire United States intelligence apparatus searching for us. Then, we need help, I said. I know someone who might have resources, but I hesitated. The person I was thinking of was Sam Richardson, a former CIA agent who had retired 5 years ago under murky circumstances. Rumors said he had become disillusioned with the agency, that he had begun to question orders. If anyone could sympathize with our situation, it would be Sam. But, Tahren pressed, but it means trusting that he won't betray us. And it means potentially ruining his life too. Tahren nodded gravely. Helena already ruined her own life for me. To ask another human to do the same. He left the sentence unfinished, but I saw no other option. We needed help, and we needed it fast. I'll call him, from a payphone, with an untraceable call. At least I can gauge his reaction. Before compromising him, We left the bathroom. I found an old payphone near the station and dialed the number I had memorized years ago, hoping Sam still used the same line. The phone rang 4 times before someone answered. "Hello?" Sam Richardson's voice, hoarser than I remembered, but unmistakable. I took a deep breath. "Sam, it's Helena Reyes. Don't hang up." There was a long pause, and I could almost hear the mental gears turning. "Helena, I've heard some interesting things about you in the last few hours. Unofficial reports circulating on certain channels. Something about a security incident involving a classified biological asset." He was speaking in code, assuming lines were compromised. "Sam, I need help. Serious help. The kind that could put you at risk." Another pause. "Where are you?" I gave him the general location of the gas station. "Stay there. Don't move. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Helena." His voice turned serious. "Whoever you brought, I hope they're worth all this trouble." And he hung up. I went back to where Tahren was waiting, hidden behind the building. "We have 20 minutes. He's coming." Those were the longest 20 minutes of my life. Every car that pulled into the parking lot made my heart race. Every person staring too long in our direction made my hand instinctively go to where my gun would be, if I still had one, which I didn't. Finally, an old but well-maintained F-150 pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. Sam got out, glanced around once assessing any threats, then waved discreetly. We moved quickly toward the vehicle. Sam had aged in the 5 years since I last saw him. Grayer hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but the same sharp gaze of someone who had spent decades in field operations. He looked at Tahren, still disguised but obviously abnormal, and his expression remained carefully neutral. "Go to the back. There's a tarp. Cover yourselves. We're getting out of this area before we talk." We didn't argue. We just obeyed. He drove for 40 minutes, leaving the metropolitan area and heading toward rural Virginia. Finally, he turned onto a dirt road that led to a secluded cabin surrounded by dense forest. "It's safe here," he said, parking. "Complete scan by electronic bugs weekly. No neighbors for 5 kilometers. You can come out." We got out of the truck, and Sam finally looked directly at Tahren, who had removed her scarf, revealing her face. To Sam's credit, he barely blinked. "So the rumors are true. You really did capture a Sasquatch." He circled Tahren slowly, not with hostility, but with the careful assessment of a professional. "And you," he turned to me, "decided to release it. Helena, do you realize what you've done? The kind of people who are looking for you now?" I nodded. "I have a pretty good idea, yes, but I couldn't leave it there, Sam. They were going to—" My voice faltered. "I know what they were going to do," Sam said softly. "I know that program, or at least I knew. An earlier version of it in the 80s. Dark Forest, they called it. I was young, stupid, following orders. I helped capture 2 of them for operational training." I looked at him in shock, and Tahren stiffened. "You?" Tahren asked, his voice low but dangerous. Sam nodded without looking away. "Yes, me. And it's something I live with to this day. That's why I left the agency. That's why I haven't slept properly a single night in the last 15 years. What happened to them? To the 2 you captured?" I pressed. Sam walked to the cabin's porch, lit a cigarette with hands that trembled slightly. "One died during training. Violent reaction when they tried to implant a control device. They had to kill him. The other," he took a deep drag, "the other was used in 3 operations, hostage rescue in mountainous terrain where helicopters couldn't go. After that, they said he became uncooperative. He was discarded. That's the word they used. Discarded." Silence weighed heavily on us all. Finally, Tahren spoke. "You evil human. But a human who knows is evil. That Something. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. Sam turned. That's why I'll help you. I can't undo what I did, but I can prevent it from happening again. You need to get to the Cascade Mountains, I presume, back to his territory. I nodded. It's on the other side of the country. Impossible without resources. Not so impossible, Sam said. I have a friend who works in freight transport. He owes me several favors. He can take you in a freight truck to Seattle, no questions asked. From there, you'll have to figure out how to get to the mountains, but at least you'll be close. It was better than any plan I had. When? I asked. He has a run leaving early tomorrow morning. He can make a detour to pick you up, but tonight you stay here. Rest. Treat that arm properly. He pointed to Tahren's injury. We spent that night at Sam's cabin. He had medical supplies, far more comprehensive than my small Dr. Carter's bag, and we treated Tahren's wound properly. Sam also had food, and he was fascinated to discover that Sasquatch were omnivores with a preference for fruits, nuts, and fish. That makes sense, he murmured. A similar food distribution to humans. More evidence of how closely related we are evolutionarily. Tahren ate with an appetite he hadn't shown in days. The medicine was working, the fever had gone down, he seemed stronger. That night, sitting around a small campfire, outside the cabin, Sam asked the question I knew was coming. Helena, have you thought about what happens next? After he's safely back with his people. You can't go back to your life. You're burned, wanted. That's forever. I had thought about it, of course. I know. I'll need a new identity, a new country maybe. I don't know, one step at a time. Sam nodded. I can help with that too. I know people who create documents that survive scrutiny. It will cost, and it will mean never contacting anyone from your previous life again, but it's possible. Why are you doing this? I asked. Helping so much. Sam looked at the fire. Because when you work for the agency, you slowly lose pieces of your soul. Little pieces, one at a time, until you look in the mirror and don't recognize the person looking back. Helping you, maybe it won't recover those pieces, but at least it prevents me from losing more. It was an honest, raw answer, and probably the truest he could give. Tahren, who had been silent, finally spoke. Strange humans, they do terrible things, then they feel bad, then they try to fix it. My people don't understand that. How does your people deal with mistakes? I asked, genuinely curious. Tahren thought for a moment. We don't do things that we then have to fix. If an action causes harm, we don't do it. Simple. It was a profoundly different philosophy. Humans acted and then dealt with the consequences. Sasquatch considered consequences before acting. Perhaps that was why they had survived in such small numbers. Extreme caution, long-term thinking, avoiding unnecessary risks. Your people are wise, I offered. Tahren gave something that might have been a smile. Wise, but nearly extinct. Perhaps wisdom isn't enough. The truck arrived at 4:30 in the morning. A semi-truck carrying industrial machinery parts, perfectly ordinary and invisible on the road. The driver, a man named Jack, who had clearly seen too much to ask questions, simply nodded as we climbed into the back. 4 days to Seattle, he said simply. Stop as little as possible. Food and water in the side compartment. Chemical toilet over there. Don't make noise when we stop at way stations. And then we were on our way. 4 days in the darkness and silence of the cargo container. Bumps on the road, heat during the day, biting cold at night. Tahren and I talked a lot during that journey. About his life, about mine, about the differences and surprising similarities between our peoples. He told me stories of his people, legends passed down through generations about the days when they were numerous, when they had great gatherings under the full moon, when they sang songs that echoed through the mountains. "Do you sing?" I asked out of curiosity. Taheren seemed embarrassed, which was surprisingly human. "Not well. Mates sing beautifully. Cubs too. Me." A raspy voice. But after some gentle persuasion, he sang a little. It was unlike any human music, tonal but not exactly melodious, more like natural harmonics mixed with something reminiscent of whale song. It was primal and beautiful, and made me cry without fully understanding why. "What's this song about?" I asked when he finished. "About about the time before humans, when the world was vast and empty and full of mystery, when every valley held something new, every mountain an unconquered challenge, about feeling small, but part of something enormous. It was a song about cosmic solitude and universal connection simultaneously. Your people are poets," I observed. Taheren gave that almost smile again. "Every people who know they are ending become poets. Words are what remains when everything else is gone." We arrived in Seattle on the 4th day, as promised. Jack stopped at a freight transfer point on the city's industrial outskirts. "This is your stop," he said. "From here you're on your own. Good luck." I thanked him, knowing that words were inadequate to express the risk he had taken for us. We set off in the early afternoon, the occasional Seattle sun breaking through grey clouds. The Cascade Mountains were visible to the east, snow-capped even in September. "How far to your territory?" I asked Taheren. He surveyed the mountains for a long moment. 2, maybe 3 days' walk. But he looked at me. "Helena can't walk like I walk. Helena needs trails, rest, human food." He was right. I was in good shape, but no match for the stamina and terrain navigation skills of a Sasquatch. "Let's go as far as I can," I replied. "Then you can continue alone. If you're rooting for them, share this video. The more people know, the harder it is to hide the truth." We rented, using fake IDs and money Sam had provided, a compact car, and drove to the furthest point the road allowed, a trail near North Cascades National Park. From there, we began to walk. Taheren moved with growing joy as we ventured deeper into a forest. This was his element, his home. The trees grew denser, human sounds faded, and the world transformed into something primal and ancient. We hiked for 2 days. I was exhausted, my muscles aching, my feet covered in blisters despite my hiking boots. But Taheren seemed to revive with every mile. On the 2nd day, he stopped suddenly, looking around, sniffing the air. "Here," he said simply. "Nearby, my clan's territory. I recognize marks on the tree, a scent on the stone." He pointed to scratches on a tree that I would never have noticed, subtle but deliberate, Sasquatch territorial markers. "So here we part ways," I said, and surprise, there was genuine pain in my voice. In the last few days, in the last shared challenges, Taheren had become not just someone I was protecting, but something close to a friend. "Helena," he said, kneeling to get closer to my level, "I haven't forgotten. My people haven't forgotten. You are Yakrin, a person of honor. If ever need be, if evil. Humans come after you." He paused, searching for words. "Forest will hide you, mountain will protect you. My people owe you their lives. We will repay that debt if necessary." Tears streamed openly down my face now. "Just live, Taheren. Live well, love your family, teach your cubs, and maybe someday when the world changes, your people won't need to hide anymore." He touched my head gently, a farewell gesture that was universal despite our differences. "Maybe." But until that day, we remain in the shadows, and we are grateful that at least one human saw us as we are, not monster, not animal, but people. And then he turned and walked into the forest. I watched until he disappeared completely among the trees and shadows, moving so silently he could have been a ghost. And he was a ghost in a way, a last echo of a world that was fading away. I stood there for a long time, alone in the vastness of the forest, before finally turning and beginning my own journey back. My life as Helena Reyes had ended. What would come next was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I would sleep without a weight on my conscience. Today, 5 years after that separation in the Cascade Mountains, I write this from a small apartment in a country I won't name, under a name I won't reveal. Sam was true to his word. He provided me with documentation that survived all tests, a new identity built with layers of legitimacy that would make it nearly impossible to trace back to Helena Reyes. I now exist as another person with a fabricated history, a modest job, a quiet life. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. I gave up everything, my career, my identity, any chance of family or meaningful relationships with people who knew me before. I can't contact my brother. I can't visit my mother's grave. I can't go anywhere in the United States without risking recognition and immediate arrest. There are days when the loneliness is almost unbearable. Days when I question whether life was a fair exchange for a clear conscience. But then I remember Tahren's eyes. I remember his voice when he spoke of his people, of their near extinction, not through their own fault, but through our relentless expansion. I remember hearing CIA operatives' plans to weaponize him, or worse, use him to find and capture others of his kind for study and operational use. And in those moments, I know I would do it all again. Exactly the same way. I have no direct news from Tahren, obviously. But Sam, who still maintains limited communication with me, occasionally sends me coded messages. Unconfirmed reports of sightings in the Cascade Mountains. Stories of hikers who swore they saw something impossible moving among the trees. Unexplained footprints found in remote areas. These are small signs that he survived, that perhaps his people still persist in the last remaining shadows. The CIA has never publicly confirmed what happened at that facility. The official story is that there was a security incident involving a rogue agent and a classified asset, but details remain buried under layers of secrecy. Some people within the agency know the truth, but it's the kind of truth that conveniently disappears from official reports. Helena Reyes is being sought quietly, but there's no public alert, no news, no acknowledgement that anything extraordinary occurred. This is, in a way, the perfect revenge of the CIA, to turn me into a non-person, to erase my existence as a warning to any other agent who might consider following orders on their conscience, but they can't erase what I know, what I witnessed. Guys, if this video gets 10K likes, I'll make a part 2 revealing other secret CIA operations. Let's go.